Welcome, I'm your host Kenny, and you're listening to Social Sleuth. Today, I'm joined by Emily Lowan, the BC Green Party leader, and I am so excited to break down her dynamic leadership campaign, learn more about her values and the BC Green platform, and really just get into some of the weird things going on at the intersection of internet culture and our provincial politics. Let's get into it.
Drum roll, please. Can anybody guess?
Hello, Emily. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So my first thing I like to do is an icebreaker, and I like to ask my guests how they define a meme.
Ooh, that is, it's evolved, continuously over the years. I feel like I create, from my own photo albums, memes, within my friend group. So I don't think it needs to be, a typical, viral meme image with some, recognizable sort of byline or whatever, but caption. And I appreciate the meme format. We really ran far and wide with it in recent years. And yeah, I don't know. I like an icebreaker though. How do you have a formal definition that comes to mind?
I don't have a formal definition. Just with doing this and asking so many different people, I kind of like it being this sort of shared definition that keeps changing. I know a lot of people like to stick to the Dawkins and the formal definition of the word meme coming into play and that virality piece. And then also talking with other people that are linguists and sort of playing with this language more formally. I was like, well, that's not even what it means at all. It is so different. And I like your point that you bring up these sort of inside jokes. So no, I don't have a definition. I just like to ask other people for theirs. And then to sort of roll into it, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit? I think it's fun to hear how people introduce themselves.
Yeah, my name's Emily Lowan. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the leader of the BC Green Party. So BC is British Columbia, Western Canada, and I grew up in so-called Victoria, which is the southern tip of Vancouver Island, and I was elected last September, and we ran a really exciting eco-socialist insurgent campaign that largely won because we doubled the membership of the party, mostly with youth under 30. And so that's really a principle I've been taking into my leadership, is that, in order to build worker power and youth power in this province, it's going to take all of us building up this movement collectively and demanding real change and pointing a finger at the corporations and the billionaires that have functionally hollowed out this province and our government. And I can get into this more later, but it's been a really hopeful time for me to focus on the bright solutions that we want to see and to be building up a truly hopeful movement.
Absolutely. I do want to get into that campaign and why I was really excited to talk about your leadership campaign as well. I saw your face everywhere, online, locally. And as you mentioned, party membership nearly doubled. And you won 60% of the vote. 60% of the vote, if I could speak. I think that's wild. Congratulations. And your announcement video
it surprised me too, to be honest.
I was not surprised by the campaign personally. I will say I shouldn't say I'm not a better, but I was not surprised. Your announcement video and short form content really stood out. It was direct, actionable, and authentic. Can you walk me behind the strategy a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I think part of the recipe of our success was feeling like we were underdogs the entirety of the race. And I think that is true. I heard throughout the race, I think from young people in more progressive circles, obviously you're a shoo-in, but across the older base of the party and a lot of the organized events that I was attending from people who've been members for decades, I was seen as I actually got this as a specific comment many times, like, you know, you're going to be a great youth rep, or you're going to be a great social media coordinator for the party. Like, you know, it's really audacious for you to try for this position. And so I think having that underdog narrative from the outset really set us up well. And I think, you know, it was an insurgent campaign in many ways. And yeah, we sort of phased the campaign with, like, the first 5 weeks were just a membership drive. So I wasn't focused on, you know, going around traveling the province. I was solely focused on a relational strategy approach to sign up new members. And so off the bat, we knew that we had to utilize social media and to sort of cast a wide net with short form videos. But I gotta say, like, with 2 weeks deep, we were signing up only like 150, 200 members a week. And so if we had stayed on that trajectory, I would not be here, likely. And so we were starting to really panic and felt like, you know, we weren't seeing the sort of action conversions. We were making the videos, but people, you know, like with a lot of social media, are consuming it passively and not actually seeing themselves as part of the movement or the party and actually going through the steps to become a member, even though it was free under 29. So yeah, from there, we switched gears pretty hard into like a sort of snowflake relational organizing approach, where it's very sort of Marshall Gans style. And we basically just tried to recruit as many volunteers in as possible. And it felt like a bit of a pyramid scheme. Like, I was kind of laughing at you know, I was like constantly doing the math of like, okay, today we need XYZ members and we need this group of people to recruit X number of people, and this needs to scale up by this date. And so it made me feel a little insane, but you know, that is sort of a mode of organizing in a membership drive that it does actually work. And so by the end of the membership drive, we had seen a near doubling of the party membership. By this point, we were cracked about 10,000 members in total. And so we had already surpassed, because of this membership drive, the BC Conservatives at the time. And so it felt like, you know, this was a promising strategy to then take back to the establishment or the sort of pre-existing members of the party and say, hey, we have demonstrated momentum. You know, you've been wanting youth members for years, and we have them now. And like that should be sort of, you know, evidence for my leadership. And I think that's really what helped deliver the 60% of the vote, because by that point we were seeing a lot more like sort of skeptical older members who were unsure about my age, felt like, you know, this was the kind of energy and momentum that they had wanted to see for years. So, by August, you know, we were focused on verifying all those new members. That's kind of an odyssey story in and of itself. It was a challenge, but I was focused on touring the province and then meeting a lot of those, you know, past candidates, other members, and getting endorsements. So, I think part of the other way we, I don't want to say sold, but like helped convince the older party membership is through like pretty high profile endorsements, because, you know, me being 24 at the time, it felt like a tough sell unless I sort of, you know, had these endorsements of people like David Suzuki and Dr. Gabor Mate and Grand Chief Stuart Phillip and Zipporah Berman. You know, it was really helpful to sort of have that bolstered support. And then, that kind of took us right into September, and you know, all throughout we were doing like in-person organizing and street canvassing and a lot of sort of the nuts and bolts of movement building and phone parties. But it was a wild ride, and I think having that kind of clarity on your strategy and your like theory of change to win was so important, and knowing those different audiences of the voter demographic. And I think, yeah, being able to identify that this was actually a race that we could win by bringing in an exciting and inspiring young people, and that sort of voter threshold was actually enough to win, because I knew that, being a movement organizer and researcher and sort of, yeah, critical ecology, like I knew that I wouldn't want to ever run in electoral politics unless I could be like uncompromising and completely myself. And so I just was not interested in like, having this theory of change to win where I had to like convince centrists to like me and convince moderate voters that, I was, and dilute myself in the process. So I think, it was definitely important that that I was able to identify from the outset that like, we could take this sort of more transformative and radical approach and actually win that way.
Yes, I could see from the outside, at least, that authenticity being a winning factor as well. Kind of have a question of if there was one specific thing that you think was the most important, but just hearing you explain that, I'm not sure if there would be anything else to say. My little notes of like the tone, the platforms, consistency, or something else, but it sounds like you just had this very strong foundation and strategy to work through, and you sort of did step by step.
Yeah,
that way.
100%. Yeah, I mean, it was so many compounding sort of key things, but like I think the team is so important. I recruited a campaign manager who had led, other sort of insurgent movement style campaigns before. So I think that kind of experience is super important. And yeah, I think I was thinking about this the other day. This is sort of a tangent, but just how like adorable and charming it is that like around, this time last year, I was furiously like submitting my application on like the last day for the party leadership deadline, because I, felt so, not conflicted, but like, overwhelmed by the prospect of diving into this headfirst at my age, and basically built my website, initial platform, an entire campaign team in like a 2-week period, and then launched into the world. And by the time we launched digitally, like we had our initial video, but like the next day I'm like, I don't even know what to post. I don't know what to do next. Like I'm so overwhelmed. And we were truly like, yeah, building the plane as we flew it and figured it out along the way. But like I think that's kind of like a beautiful lesson for people who are thinking about dipping a toe or, just taking on any like scary leadership challenge that they feel inspired and drawn to, is that, yeah, you just really fake it till you make it. That was the the guiding principle for sure.
It sounds like it's been figured out, and it worked out. It's very inspiring. Where am I? Oh, one thing that made the headlines was the verification process for the leadership vote. So this is where thousands of new young voters were struggling to confirm their identity for the leadership vote in particular. How did you navigate that?
Yeah, this was a tough one. Basically, in the past few years, political parties have been experimenting with bringing in additional verification for members before voting. In the Liberal Party of Canada, with when Mark Carney sort of became Prime Minister through that leadership race, it was verification across both old and new members. I think there was separate challenges with that, using sort of this weird Canada Post contract. But in the case of my race, the party decided to only verify new members. So it was effectively this two-tier system that if it had been a seamless process, it wouldn't have been an issue. If it was integrated with voting, if it was one step, then there wouldn't have been any issues there. But basically, I think, and this is in large part not due to malice, but due to under-resourcing. We're a small party, and come time for verification, they launched a multi-day 5-step process, initially only for new members. And, just a few weeks before the deadline, and they were continuously extending the deadline, there was like, a 15 or 20% verification rate of the members that I had signed up. And so it felt like it was tormenting, because we had obviously just spent 5 weeks like signing up these new members, bringing people into the party. And because the verification process was so high barrier, we were turning people away, right? Like, it's young people, I think, especially, who are just starting to get politically engaged and involved. Like, it takes nothing to like turn folks off and make them feel, like nervous or unwelcome. And so I felt very passionate that we should make this, as accessible as possible. And so I advocated to the party. We sent a letter. We had several meetings with the party executive, and they weren't particularly interested in making any significant changes. And so at that point, I just felt like it was so unacceptable that we would have a multi-day, multi-step process like this, and that, it would effectively suppress a lot of these new members from voting. So at this point, I sent a legal letter to the party outlining, how this comes into conflict with the party's own constitution and bylaws, and that, I felt a real sense of obligation as someone who's brought in these new members to fight for them, and to ensure that they had an accessible experience, and that they felt like they were able to easily vote. And so there was some pieces around that came out to the media. I did not leak that letter to the media. That remains a mystery. And so, election campaigns, full of bumps in the road. And it was, I would have never wanted, I think it was quite a fair letter. It wasn't particularly exciting, but of course media want to sensationalize the headlines. But just to say that we were successful in making the verification process more accessible. We ended up doing like sort of a Zoom drop-in, so folks were able to just do it in one simple step. And they shored up the staff capacity to make that happen. And so, it was definitely sort of a bumpy process. And I, at the end of the day, I really think that Elections BC should take over election races for party leadership like this across the board. We just saw the BC Conservative leadership race unfold. They also had a lot of issues with verification. They chose this American company with a controversial background that was deterring some of their members from voting. So all to say that I think it's important for a well-resourced, nonpartisan body to handle these races, because it certainly threw my campaign and the party for a loop. And it was that sort of took us right up until voting. And then, from there, we've just been focused on, building up the party and getting ready for the next election, whenever that may be.
Yes. Remains a mystery, or just a ticking time clock. I think that's really interesting. I like how you also brought in the workaround that you were able to find to still maintain within what needed to happen, but utilizing your team and those members to make it really easy. And I think that shows for your leadership capabilities of looking out for everybody and making those changes happen and doing it through the right process and through the institution. I guess my follow-up question that you've sort of answered already in saying that this should be maybe housed with Elections BC, but what's your take on balancing online accessibility with the integrity of the democratic process? Because obviously that becomes contentious for some.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so you've sort of mentioned, I think like maybe this has kind of been answered already, but with having a one-step process, but sort of people sort of bringing this up in that way of, well, you want to just get everybody in there and there needs to be some sort of rules and regulations. I wonder if you have like a more defined stance on that.
Yeah, I think, if Elections BC were to start fresh and take this over, I'm really not opposed to verification. I just think it needs to be accessible and also applied across all members. And so I think in an ideal world, we would have a system where it was integrated with the voting process. And so, you would start off and, verify your identity. It would be with, a Canadian company that stores our data securely, not on the Google Cloud or, whatever. Like, Elections BC could sort of rigorously vet that process. And then, then you would be able to sort of be approved or, redirected to some sort of help agent or someone on the phone who could support you with the verification process if for whatever reason it wasn't working in that one step. And then, I can see that sort of working at scale to ensure that, all folks are verified. I mean, I'd honestly be curious to look into countries that do online voting for sort of significant elections like this and how that could be brought into, party member-based elections. But certainly, I think in addition to sort of the one-step process, there could be other options with like mail-in if you wanted that like additional lead time and multiple steps. Like, there should be other modes available other than simply online. But I think there's definitely some technological and structural work to do in this area. But good question.
Thank you. And then sort of the online momentum into the real world impact. I think it's clear you kept the energy going since becoming leader, staying active online, keeping people updated on party events and different sort of platform pieces like the Fight the Oligarchs tour. How has the increase in membership and online virality actually translated into the in-person organizing and real political engagement?
Yeah, it's been amazing to see like young people come into the riding associations and help like energize and take on leadership roles and to really start those brass tack organizing steps of election preparedness. So that was a big goal of my tour, is going into communities, hosting events, and then giving people the tools they need to like start a riding association or restart it, re-energize it. So I think we're starting to see that that momentum translate, and it's something that we're constantly trying to land in our work is if we're putting out a video or a statement, how is that helping translate into like on the ground organizing and like real world stuff, because I think it's a very similar comparison to what we faced in the first month of my leadership race. Is we were getting all this passive support and engagement online, but it wasn't translating. And I think it really requires that sort of relational approach, people inviting their friends to these events and spreading the word, taking on roles in the riding associations. And another approach that we've taken is like, I kind of see our parties being, in a way, sort of like a vehicle and a movement of movements, and being able to work in lockstep with progressive and labor movements, social movements, as they organize on different issues across BC. So how we've been doing that is, I think it's part sort of like my role and vocal support and showing up, on picket lines or in protest spaces, but also, sharing out to our membership, our volunteers and supporters to like, hey, this is happening in your area. Like, go organize with these folks, volunteer, help out. And I think that, really sort of helps ground and energize the party and, helps us, be this resilient force across issues and, be supportive to different movements when they're escalating. So that's another approach that we've taken to sort of like, make the online momentum real and grow the movement as a whole.
That's very exciting. I do have sort of more like platform specific questions just from things that I've seen online and wanted to sort of bring into my podcast scope. First is the AI data centers being pushed hard both by the provincial and the federal government, sold on the sort of renewable energy data sovereignty slogan. The BC Greens have called for a moratorium. What clear parameters do you think need to be put in before anything else moves forward?
Yeah, so the moratorium is a way of saying we need to pause, because what we're seeing across the board, across the political establishment in Canada, is politicians just blindly chasing the AI bubble. They want to be involved. They want to be invited to the big kids table. and I think that is such a backwards approach to policy making and is a surefire way of harming people, workers, and the planet. And I think it's important to recognize that like BC is not the guinea pig on data centers. We've already seen this play out like across the United States. And because they are so damaging to the water supply, to energy, and for noise pollution, there are 50 active bans across jurisdictions in the United States on data centers. So our call is echoing Bernie Sanders as well as, Avi Lewis's call for a pause federally. But I think it's important to acknowledge that this has been actively practiced in or implemented in Ireland and the Netherlands, who have both passed a moratorium and are, I think, in the process of working on regulations. And so, I think for me, the BC specific context is really important. Like, we haven't seen any assessment of the hydro demand, for instance, and how this will potentially make us more dependent on the US's coal-fired electricity. Because right now, because of our drought conditions in BC, we are net importing electricity from the US, which comes from coal-fired sources. So I'm really concerned about how these AI data centers will impact hydro supply, particularly in our drought conditions. And I don't know, I think at the very least, we we need to know what we don't know and be asking these questions and have this space before these are put into, very viable real estate areas of Vancouver and other communities before knowing the damage to our water and our ecosystems as well as noise pollution. I think a huge missing element is transparency. And what we're seeing from the provincial government is pretty minimal advocacy to the federal government on what AI regulations should look like. So we're getting a little bit away from the data center topic specifically, but it was only because of the tragedy of Tumbler Ridge in British Columbia, which is, the largest mass shooting event that our province has seen. It was incredibly tragic. And only because of that relation and connection to OpenAI is the province advocating for standardized reporting for AI companies on, concerning user behavior, for instance. And so it makes me I think that really clicked for me is our province is operating on a tragedy to tragedy, crisis to crisis basis on regulation. There's no way that they would be advocating for that specific policy if Tumbler Ridge had not happened. And so that to me just feels like we're missing the public debate on AI and it's being rammed down our throats. And we need to pause in order to really understand how and if it can safely exist in our communities.
Thank you. That was very insightful, sort of the main ideas of transparency and looking more proactively rather than just, again, responding to tragedies, to echo what you said. I think that's very reasonable. Yeah. And I do agree that it does feel, as a constituent, that everything is just moving and there is no public debate when usually there would be at least a sense of one. And so that just opens up more questions for the public as well of money and different connections and all of those things. So yes, transparency is great. Sort of similar with this idea, platform specific and online, but social media bans for under 16. I just wonder, what are your thoughts? It's quite dynamic.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways this policy misses the mark for me. In practice, it would either look like checking a box, verifying that you're over the age of 16 on social media. And if you've ever been around a teenager in this day and age, you know that's not even remotely effective. And the other option is, uploading your identity or some kind of identity verification, which is just another way of big tech companies gleaning more of our personal information and surveilling us. So I think it's missing the bigger picture, and it feels like it's just a cheap win for establishment politicians to, I don't know, look like they're protecting the public when we're completely missing the conversation on regulating big tech and these AI companies, these social media companies. And so, yeah, I think, for me, I'm not a parent, but I can imagine that a social media ban under the age of 16 is culturally helpful. In the sense that it's something that, you can socialize, you can tell your kids, and it's a way of raising the conversation about the harms of social media, teaching it in schools. It's something that teachers can reference and justify. So I can see it being helpful from a cultural norms perspective, but I don't want people to feel like this is an effective regulation when we look at the broad scope of social media and tech companies who are, increasingly voraciously surveilling our everyday lives. And so, yeah, I think we can't miss that part of the conversation. And I mean, fundamentally, we also need to create a world that young people feel excited and hopeful about, and that we don't have this constant incentive to just bury ourselves into the screen. You know, we need to do the much harder work of building a community and a life that's worth living.
Definitely, yeah. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a stance for lowering the voter age as well. So I just wondered how that sort of would cross over of this. You're 16, you're able to do this, but you're not able to do this. And I like your point about the cultural norm and raising that. I hadn't thought about it from that sort of angle, and that can be beneficial. But yeah, I just wonder if that, like, where
Yeah,
that crosses over in your mind.
I hadn't actually thought of these two things in conjunction before. I mean, I am a big advocate of lowering the voting age to 16. The UK did it just last July, and I think Canada, BC should do the same. I was really politicized when I was 16 for the first time, and that's largely because I had kind of an amazing high school social studies teacher that sort of brought me into the world of climate politics and social justice, and having that tangible opportunity also, I think, creates more space in like school curriculums to do deeper political education. To an extent that happens, but I think teachers need to be equipped with like giving really like kind of university level critical thinking skills assessments into classrooms, you know, being able to identify and debunk misinformation. You know, obviously this online landscape is changing so terrifyingly rapidly. But yeah, I think, you know, it makes a lot of sense for me that, you know, young people should build these habits starting at 16 when they're really like reckoning with their future, when political decisions that are happening right now are going to directly impact them the most into the future, and being able to have a stake and a voice and a seat at the table feels really important. When I was 16, I was like horrified when I found out how low the youth voter turnout rate is, you know, in Canada and in our province. And I went into my principal's office and organized buses, like all the school buses, to shuttle any interested eligible voters in all the regional high schools to the voter polls. Because, you know, for students who live more rurally, or, you know, maybe don't have a car or active transportation, like it can be pretty inaccessible to physically show up at a voter poll. And the more we build in these lifelong habits, like if you vote, you know, for the first time when you're eligible, you're far more likely to become a lifelong voter. And so I think the more and imagine if we have this structure of like voting at 16 when you're a high school age, it would just become a much broader cultural norm, because you all head down to the polls together, whoever's interested, and it would be far more accessible and sort of create those lifelong habits.
Absolutely. So yeah, as we were talking and kind of thinking of it too, my own personal beliefs of this sort of not infantilizing teenagers, but rather making the environment safer and making it better in the context of social media, and empowering them to be people, to take control of their choices and their rights to vote. So thank you for expanding on that.
That's such a great way of like bringing those two policies together. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
And then I'm gonna click to my other page. I had added this because this was way more recent, and I was very not excited. Excited's not the right word. Shocked, horrified, but about the U.S. billionaire buyout of farmland across BC. I kind of knew about this but not formally. I didn't realize it was actually happening on the scale that it was happening on, just through word of mouth of people living in these communities. And I've seen that you've launched in conjunction with the organization. You'll have to correct me on what that group is, but for the petition, to sort of raise more awareness about this U.S. billionaire buyout of farmland. And I wonder how being able to broadcast directly to your audience, how you are owning your own media with the social media channels, and sort of just how the internet works with sharing and networking, if that has impacted political tools like petitions and how that's been as a leader.
Yeah, I think our best campaigns have not been, reactions to the mainstream news cycle, but have been our own research and discoveries that we've then promoted through our own social media and given people like very tangible actions to take. So the first example where I was like, oh, we have, this is like, a real approach that has legs, was actually with Jim Pattison, who's the richest man in BC. He's worth about 13 billion, give or take. Doubled his net worth in COVID by price gouging on groceries. And basically, we found out this is through like a Google alert randomly in Virginia, right? Because we just have Pattison. We have all BC billionaires on Google alert at all times. And so we found this, it was like this super small local outlet in Virginia that Jim Pattison was about to sell his massive warehouse to ICE to become a detention facility. And he was going to make about 60 million profit on this sale. And it was about to sort of happen within that week. And so we had this under our hat for just a few days. And then it was the horrific murder of Alex Preddy just took the world by storm. And obviously there's mass protests erupting across the country and in Minnesota. But so it was the next day that, we felt like this was the time to really connect these two issues and to give people a clear way to stand up against ICE and, challenge this BC billionaire from profiting off of these horrifying acts with the U.S. administration. And so, yeah, we called for a boycott of all of Pattison's grocery stores and then put out a video that went quite viral. And so this all happened over the weekend. And then by Monday, it became national and then international news. And then a few days later, after initially responding and rejecting that they were going to stop the sale, like they basically said, sorry for your concern, but we're going through with it. They pulled out just a few days later. So I think this sort of approach to, finding connections where, BC billionaires, big corporations are quietly stealing from citizens, price gouging, or, hollowing out our province, whether that's farmland or groceries, being able to put a spotlight on that because it's not something that media really reports on, and giving folks a clear way to escalate pressure, to take action. That's been, I think, an important approach to really explain to people like what oligarchy is. What does it mean to have a province that is captured by corporations or a country, and being able to like spell that out with clear examples and solutions. So yeah, that's something that we're trying really hard to do with this farmland buyout by American billionaires. But the Minister of Agriculture, Lana Popham, has a very clear solution here. She could follow in the footsteps of Quebec and restrict this kind of foreign ownership. She could empower local governments to tax these kind of farm owners. And it feels like there's a lot of, common sense policy that we could be taking action on, but there just hasn't been the political will to get there. So I'm excited by what we might be able to pull off, because the more that we tour the province and we look into it, the more we realize the monopoly control that's held in the hands of just a few people. As I mentioned in the video, Stan Kroenke, who is the heir to the Walmart fortune, owns about 13% of BC's agricultural land. So he owns about 1.5 million acres of farmland across our province. And that shouldn't be allowed, right? And so in order to really safeguard food security and ensure that BC farmers have access to arable land, we need to address this issue of foreign ownership.
And I like how you're clearing out the noise and sort of bringing it back into that idea of a lot of us being, myself included, I'll put myself in the bucket of being passive online. Maybe not to the point of this sort of clicktivism type of behavior, but it's so easy to see these headlines and go, that is so insane. I almost don't even believe it. Or I don't even want to believe it. I don't want to engage with it. And so there's that passiveness. Yeah. But when it's put on this pedestal, like you've said, mainstream media is not really bringing any of these stories to light for whatever reason. But having it out there, and we can all sort of be like, oh, we all think this is crazy. Now we can sort of do something about it. And so I like seeing that as just an audience member, not even through this sort of podcasting scope. My separate brain for that. So it is really awesome to see. And especially on that provincial level, that not a lot of other sort of stakeholders other than yourself really have that maybe spot. You're the lady, you're the one doing it. I did want to move into my last question, but we're both Gen Z. The web isn't new to us. We're definitely comfortable there. And I wonder what your vision for a healthier online political culture looks like. We know it's not perfect. There's algorithms and echo chambers and disinformation and blah, 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 bots and trolls and everything. But where do you hope to see us heading?
That is an awesome question, because I honestly struggle with this so much, because I've built this platform on Meta, controlled by US oligarchs, and on Instagram, and it feels like we have meaningful contributions, but I'm also engaging in short form videos that are very I feel like a part of the, maybe this is too harsh, but a part of the attention shortening path that we find ourselves on. And so I would love a world in which we could all read long news form in and have our data safely secured, and have far less time on social media platforms. But I think partly we've built this platform because of the shortcomings of mainstream media. And I am all up for platform alternatives and building on those alternatives as they come up, if they are genuinely less addictive and better for our nervous systems and not so intentionally polarizing. Because I'm super alive and aware to the harms of the platforms that I engage in, and it's something that I grapple with a lot. But I kind of just dream about a world where we can all live a dignified life and have spare time to organize and engage in politics, and that in sort of a format that is grounded in our local communities, and where we have platforms where we can sort of better digest and analyze and understand what is happening in the world around us. And that's certainly not the social media environment right now, but I hope that we can actively seek out and build those alternatives ourselves.
I like that. That sounds great to me. But yes, we have to work with what we have right now, and doing that the best that we can is what we need to do. And then the closing, I like to close. I give my guests the last words. It's your soapbox to end the show.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. I mean, the campaign that we launched last July of Fight the Oligarchs, Fund Our Future, that was the mantra, that was the slogan of our leadership race. And that's something that continues to animate our leadership. And I think one of the campaigns that I'm really excited about in the future is potentially a referendum on a wealth tax on billionaires in BC. We haven't done a referendum in a very long time, but I think it'll really paint the picture of just how unequal our province is, and how our, really relaxed and hollowed out taxation system has enriched the very 1% of our province, and how that has actually eroded our democracy. And so I'm excited to be pushing for this. We just got some research approximating what that wealth tax could look like. And so on BC Billionaires, and, in this sort of $100 million sort of wealth range, a modest tax could generate $13 billion in its first year. And so just imagine what we could do with that kind of wealth. And I think that really helps resist and debunk the austerity arguments that we hear from so-called progressive governments like the BC NDP. And after pitching this very tax to our premier, the first thing that he said was, oh, well, capital flight is a concern. But that's really just code for political cowardice, because when you look at other jurisdictions who have implemented such a wealth tax, or, a higher income tax on, ultra millionaires, they don't leave. People aren't in BC because it's a tax haven. It's because it's a beautiful place to live. It's a hub of innovation and opportunity. And I think that people who have benefited from our workers, from, our government research and services, should be paying back so we can fund things like universal childcare, social housing, and free and fast transit. This is just such a common sense policy. And I think the resistance to it from the political establishment and big corporations and billionaires just will, I think, help people realize how rigged our economy is right now, and how we need to really unite across the working class to take our power back. So yeah, I hope you'll join me in this fight. Any folks that are passionate about this work and this fight, to sign up to be a member of the BC Greens. And if you're able to, it makes a real difference to donate even $5 or $10 a month. So we have that sort of sustained mass movement of funding. And it's been such a real treat to spend this time with you, Kenzie. And I loved your questions. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Emily, for tackling these questions and showcasing not only your leadership ability, but your motivation, awareness, and authenticity. It was really great to chat through all of these topics. The BC Greens and Emily Lowan's socials will be linked below. You can find more from me at KennyC402 on Substack. And this show, Social Sleuth, is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening. Keep sleuthing.